Hey, what up, y'all? I am Lou, and today I'm going to show y'all on how to use Python to interact with an API to take that data that you're going to get from the API. In this case, it'll be a JSON object. We're going to extract the data out, then we're going to load it to a Postgres database. We're going to be using a ORM. So if you're not familiar with the ORM, you'll get some exposure to that in this video. Why it's better than using raw SQL. But nevertheless, I'll explain that later on in the video. Same thing with when it comes to the database. And again, if you're not that familiar from a database standpoint, I'm going to kind of walk through the process. We're going to create a table so we could save all of our data to this table. So again, you'll get some exposure to the database aspect of it, right? So again, overall in the video, we're talking about Python, communicating with the API, a Restful API. We're going to extract that JSON data. We're going to load it to a Postgres database using an ORM. And that at least give you the foundation overall if you ever work on a project where you need to create, again, this job, the script that, let's say, runs daily or nightly or whatever, maybe, every hour, doesn't matter, where you need to call this API over and over again. You need to take that data, load it to the database, and eventually, that data will get used for other parts, of the business. But hopefully this helps you out. So let's get started. All right, so let's get started. So I have a I created a brand new database called Sandbox. So what we're going to do for this project is we're going to be looking up a stock symbol, and we're going to probably run it at the end of every day just to kind of see how it's being priced, once a day. And as we collect this data, we're going to be loading this data to the database. So I'm going to start off by, let me zoom in. Just to make sure that you're able to see it properly. There it goes. So what was the control plus? There it goes. All right, so we're gonna do a create table public. Again, those of you who are coming from SQL Server, it'll be create table DBO. In this case, I'm using Postgres, so it'll be create table public. We're just gonna call it stock stock price, right? So let's call it stock price. All right, so we have our open and close parentheses. Inside of there, that's where we're going to be specifying the columns for each attribute that we're going to capture. So the first one, and again, in any database, is recommended to always have just some kind of unique identifier. It could be a GUID. It could be, again, just a integer, the sequence, something. It makes it easier when you start having applications connecting to it and so on, and you need to do updates like a UI. You could get it by the ID. So again, different subject, but just want to notate that. So we're going to call it ID. This is the name of our column. And I'm going to call serial. And I'm going to make this primary key. All right, so those of you who may be wondering, well, what is serial? So in reality, what's going to happen is this is kind of more so like Postgres system value, where what this does in reality behind the scenes is actually going to create this column as a integer. All right, number one. Then on top of that, it's going to create a function that anytime there's a new record that's inserted into the table, it's going to get this value and increment by 1. But instead of me in this case having to create that function and do all of that, I could just use a serial syntax, and ultimately Postgres will create it for me. Just an easier way to do it. if you're using SQL Server, again, I'm comparing SQL Server because there are a lot of people that, especially from corporate, that come from a corporation, that's a system that you're probably familiar with. This would not be serial. It would actually be identity. Integer, identity, then primary key. Again, I probably should make that for another video. I don't want to go. I don't want to go too detailed of trying to compare the difference of SQL Server and Postgres. The main purpose here is more so Python and API and interacting with the database. So let me just, I guess, get back to before I get all sidetracked and video ended up taking longer than what it should. So let's get this created, right? Primary key, which is valid. We're going to have our stock ticker. So when it comes to stock ticker, so again, I'm going to use stock ticker for example, but any value that you're going to be capturing, you want to try to, if you're able to identify what the links is for that value, then it makes sense to specify it. If you don't know, you want to get a good estimate, right? A good example would be, let's say we're going to do state code. Well, we know that state code wouldn't have 2 characters, right? So that's a little bit more, we could configure that column to be max length of 2, you know. But if you're dealing with something more like state name, well, now you could go through and try to figure out, well, what is the max length of the state name? And it may be some odd number, maybe like 37 or something like that, whatever the number is. But what you could do in those cases is just kind of create a max length of something like 40 or 50 characters, right? Something of that sense. In this case, I did a Google search and it pretty much telling me for the most have, we're probably dealing, a lot of them, I believe it's 4 to 5, but NASDAQ is up to 6. So I'm gonna set it to 6 characters max, my column. So in this case, do a varchar 6. Okay, so we figured out. All right, so we figured out that the max length for stock ticker is 6. So let's just go ahead and set that to 6. Varchar 6. I'm gonna put not no because again I don't want to be blank. And so what happens here if I happen to insert any value and no value, right? You know, not blank, because blank is different from no. They're not the same. But if I don't insert a value, that's probably the best wording. If I don't insert a value, it's going to error out on the database side because I'm pretty much telling it, right? I'm telling the database it cannot be no. Simple as that. What else? So we're probably going to capture open price. All right. So, and we're gonna open price could vary. I'm gonna put 10 decimal values total with a decimal placement of. I'm gonna do 4 in this case. I mean 2 probably would do fine, but yeah, I'm just not. Just in case if it goes beyond 2 decimal places, 4 should be fine. So let me up this up to 12. So what this means is this will be a total of, for example, if you have a stock price. I'm trying to think like Berkshire Hathaway. I know that's a big. Let's see. So let's take a look at it. The most expensive stock, yep, Berkshire Hathaway, there you go. $320, $320,000, my bad. So just think, when we think about it, that's already 6 decimals, 6 values in all. And then of course you have your decimal places. Let's say, I'm assuming it's 2. I don't think it goes beyond 2. It can be, man. I think penny stocks do go. What am I talking about? Penny stocks do go beyond 2. They could go 0.004 or whatever, maybe. All right. So that being said, I'm going to actually move this and make this 7, knowing that the max is 6. So what this ultimately means is we will be having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 decimal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that means we have 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. All right, so 14 total with 7 decimal places. Again, I'm not sure we have an opening price in the API, so I'm gonna make this just no. Like it could be no, that's fine. Then I'm gonna have end of day price. All right, same thing. 14.7. Now this one I should have without a doubt. So well, no, you know what? I may not have, depending on, again, depending on how you pull your API. In my case, I'm pulling. I am going to be running an API that is for strictly for end of day, which means if I'm running it in the middle of the trading period, like trading day, it wouldn't give me no data for that day. It will give me data for the previous day. So I think because of that, it should be fine. End of day should be fine. End of day price. So we have open price, end of day price. What I should have put over here is I'm only doing it for that specific date, and I'm going to actually notate this so that stock. I'm going to change the name of this. Stock end of day price. All right, and so I'm going to have a date. And we'll call it date. Call it something else. Let me call it end of day date. And on top, so the reason why I did that is, I don't know if you noticed, it turns blue. Date is a kind of like, there's some keywords, right? You know, I believe you could use it. Sometimes it causes issues when you do call it. You got to put in square brackets. I don't want to deal with all that crap. So just to make it easier, we call it end of day date. This will be timestamp and not no. And then I'm going to create a created date on when we ran this job and, you know, loaded the data into the database. Same thing, timestamp, default now. All right, so that's pretty much it. Let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so now if I refresh my database, we'll see the table over here on the side. Right, so here's the thing that I was telling you about, the whole function that it creates and ultimately doing a sequence. This is what it's doing here, right? So that's kind of, as you could tell, it's an integer 4 data type. That's not what I put serial, but it's something that Postgres offers. SQL Server, that's not the case. SQL Server is actually different. You have to use the identity, and then you got to configure the identity on what number do you want to start. You want to start at number 1, number 1,000, number 1,000,000, you know, whatever number you want to start. So either way, we got that created. So now that we have our table created, next steps is let's start building our Python script, right? So let me go to my project. So I have a folder. Again, it's brand new, so everything that we're doing right now is going to be from scratch. So I'm gonna do a few things, and let me kind of go to my terminal. Let me go into this project. All right, so okay. So the first thing that I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to create a virtual environment. Again, if you're not familiar with Python virtual environment, get familiar with it, because man, you should not be creating any projects without it. And again, you could go to their the python.org website. So this would kind of explain. It's very simple. It's not hard at all. This kind of provides some steps on what to do. So let's get started. So what I'm going to do on mine is I'm going to do, say, Python m my virtual environment. I'm going to just call it virtual environment, and let's run it. All right, still running. As you could tell, it created this folder. You can see it back here in the back. And what this does, again, if you're not familiar with what this actually does, think of it as it's getting a clone of your Python that you have installed, the version that you have installed, right? Like in my case, I believe I'm running 3.8. It takes a copy of that, it puts into this new folder, but it's a stripped down version of it. It's like just the basic necessities of what you need. And from here, you could install more packages, right? You could kind of start installing more items to it. That's ultimately what that does. So let me go back to my terminal. So right off the top, we're dealing with a Postgres database, and we're gonna want to connect to that database using a ORM. We're using Peewee for the ORM. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to activate this virtual environment first. So let's do a source virtual environment, scripts, activate. Again, if you're on a Linux machine, it's virtual, whatever the virtual environment is, bins, then activate. You could tell when you have it activated because you'll see the name of your virtual environment there. So now I could start installing and so forth, right? So so what I want to see, I want to update my pip right quick. So let's get that updated right quick. All right, so let's see. All right, there it goes. That's been updated. So next, we're going to start installing some of our packages. So the first one we're going to do is pip Peewee. Pip install Peewee. This is the ORM that we need. Now, one of the other ones that we need, this is going to be more so related to Postgres. So let's get that installed. What am I doing? So it's pip install what PSY. All right, so now we got that installed. Let's see what else. I want to say that's probably all we need for now. You know what? I think we're gonna need our request as well package. Let's get that installed as well. All right, so that's done. Okay, I think we're good. I think we are good. Okay, so I want to kind of show you on what the API that we're going to actually be calling. It's this market stack API. So I'm going to be pretty much calling a specific stock ticker, and the goal here is have that run every night, right? Very, the overall goal, right? For the tutorials, I'm doing it to show you, but in a more real world on how you would use it, that will be the purpose here. If you want to get data off that, stock ticker, as you could tell, this API has end of day data, in trans data, real-time updates, historical data. So if you're trying to do some analysis on a specific stock and you want to get all that data to analyze and maybe suck it into a Power BI report or Tableau or something, this is why you would want to do something like that, right? You want to be able to pull that data, put it into a database in this case, and then you could easily, again, you could just use Excel if you want, but you could start doing your analysis off of it. In our case, we'll be doing the end of day data, and we'll be calling it just once a day. So that's what I'm going to be doing here in this case. So just kind of more FYI, if you want to practice on something like this, you could get, I have a free account. I believe it's a 1,000 API requests per month. So that's more than enough that I need, for what I'm doing. So again, feel free to get you a free account as well. You kind of, play around with it, get familiar with it. But again, we're going to be dealing with the end of the day. So let's take a look at ultimately what we're doing. As we could tell in the URL, we're calling the API URL, which would be this guy, version 1. Then normally here at the far end we have EOD, which stands for end of day. Depending on which API you're calling, right? If we take a look at the in transit day, you could tell it says doesn't say end of day. So that that piece of the URL is what specifies which API to call, right? So I mean, because again, it's not like, hey, you call it one API. In this case, the URL determines which API you're actually calling. So in our case, we'll be calling the end of the day API, which is EOD. And then as we could see, we're going to be passing in the access key. So I guess let's take a look at an example. So it does say you can specify the date that you want. You could tell, right, end of the date. So we have the date here, and this, you can specify the exact time. In our case, we'll just be specifying the date, right? The year, month, date, that's it. Just like this. Or you could, that's pretty cool, specify the latest. So if you're going to be running it every day, then this is probably even easier. So that, again, I would probably use that, run it once a day, just run it for end of day. So let's see, what are our parameters? So the parameters is access key, which makes sense. I have it in my account. The symbol, that makes sense. Then everything else is optional. And then this is our response. This is what we actually get back. Again, we're only getting back one API symbol, so based on what we're getting back, we have a date, which is going to be the date that we called. The symbol, there it goes. It does have open. It does have high, low, and then the close, and of course the volume and everything else. So again, we probably could add some of these other attributes as well, but that's fine. Just for the testing, we're only working with those, which is open and close. Okay, so that makes sense. Okay, so now that's good. So what they do have is an example in Python. So let's take a quick look at it. Okay, so it is being passed in as a parameter. Okay, so that's interesting. And then of course, all right, so we're not passing nothing into the body. Again, some APIs you send, whether it be your access token and some of these other, you send it to the body, not through a parameter. In this case, it's an actual parameter. It just varies on how they build it. So all right, at least again, overall, it looks pretty straightforward. All right, guys. So I had to stop the recording. I came back, and when I started the recording again, for some crazy reason, I turned off my mic. I probably recorded about 30 minutes worth of the session, and it had no freaking voice to it, man, no audio. So I'm pretty much going through it again. Now, there's some pieces that I did already. I'll go through and I'll explain what it is. Again, sucks. Initially, I went through it step by step. I'll try to provide some insight to what I did. But nevertheless, though, I mean, some of the stuff I did have to scrap because I do want to walk you through it. But it sucks, man. I had to go through it again. It is what it is. So let's go to our project now, and let's see. So one of the things that we ended up doing is we created a get ignore file to ignore our virtual environment, which is what we have in here. I created 3 files: a config, models, and run. Okay, so I have these 3 files. One of the things that need to install in here that I did not install is environment variables package. So I'm doing that so I kind of show you what I'm doing, but also without showing you my password and that kind of information. And it's also beneficial to do it when you kind of implementing stuff in production where you don't want to hard code in the credentials and so on. So let's go ahead and get that installed. It's pip install Python DOTENV. All right, so we got that installed now. And ultimately what that means is I'm going to have to create a .env file. This .env is where I will put in my my password and that, you know, that kind of information. So the way it works, it's a key value pair. So let's look at their documentation right quick. So we take a look at it. You can say it reads key value pairs, and this is the format that we will put it in. So put everything in, you know, I would just kind of follow the pattern that's in part of the documentation. Just you can make everything uppercase, then it'll be equals, and then whatever the value is, right? You could put it in double quotes. You could not put it in double quotes, you know. So, but nevertheless, it's gonna. So in my case, I will put host equals whatever the host is, you know. Password equals the password. Username equals username. So that that's something that I'm gonna end up doing in this file. So I won't. Again, I'm not going to do it from the recordings, but what I would do, at least at the minimum, is at least configure on what, you know, how it would look like at least. So let me do that at least. So let's see. Okay, so all right, so let me get that copied over here. So it's going to be database user, database password, database name, and database host. It's ultimately what I'm going to have over here. Again, you could put your information in here. I'll put mine, but I'm just not gonna like share it in the video. But I want to at least show you the format, right? It'll be that, you know, whatever the username is, of course. You know, again, password, you know, password. Then of course the name of your database. Now the name I could share with you. I could share that with you. I believe I called it sandbox. And then of course it'll be my host. In this case, I'm using a RDS, a Postgres database. I have a few that I use, production and test, and it's all part of my business. You know, a lot of the work that I do, I manage web application for my clients, do integration for my clients and so on. So I have a few Postgres and SQL Server databases, but again, that's a whole different subject. But at least you know how it looks, right? So let me go ahead and close out of that. Give you, at least you have an idea of how that looks. So I'm gonna come to my config file. So let's get this configured. Get it configured, right? So first I need to import in my import OS. Next is going to be my dot-env import load dot-env. All right. So the next thing that I'm going to put, I can share with y'all. It's not a big deal at all. So let me go ahead and put it in here. What this function is doing is ultimately reading your environment variable file, and we're actually going to then parse the values out of that. And again, this is the key, so whatever the key is, we're going to get that value and it's going to ultimately populate here. So then ultimately we're going to use a config file to call our database and and other pieces of our application to be able to connect to the database. So that's kind of how it flows. But so what I need to do in my case is I'm actually going to open it up in a different screen of mine so I can put in my credentials. Again, I'm not trying to share my password or anything. Again, it's a test database, so if something happens, it's not that big of a deal. But nevertheless, I'm not trying to do it anyway. So let me get my. If you see me looking around, just FYI, I have 5 monitors. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which is why my eyes and my head is going all over the place. Let's see. All right, so let me just put all my information in there. So what is this password? Username. And I believe the database, let me confirm. The database is called Sandbox. Yep. Okay, so I got that saved. Let me close out of it. Okay, so which means if I were to run this, it would actually it's gonna create this. It's gonna populate my database dictionary. Ultimately, what it is with all the proper information. Host, username, password name, etc. Right? So it's going to do that because again, when I execute this load dot environment variable function, it's pretty much reading my file, my environment variable file, my dot env, extract against key value pair the key, and then of course whatever equals the value, it's going to populate it. So now let's go back. Let's look at the model file again. This is, I had this recorded, notice I have no audio in my video. So let me just kind of walk you through this. So first we want to start off by importing in our Postgres database class from our PW library. On top of that, there's a models class that we're bringing in. And then what I'm doing here is I'm creating this called base model. So I could just import in my model directly, but what this does is when I create a base model, I'm establishing my database connection within the base model, which also contains my model objects. And then all I'm doing here is I am inheriting my base model into my other class, which again brings in the database connection and of course all the other objects that relates to the model. These are all of the classes that relates to that model, right? Auto field, all of this coming from the model class. And then of course in the bottom I have my metadata class, which specifies the name of my table. Again, this is the actual name that it's in my database. Just kind of go through it right quick. Auto field is for like when you have a increment field that increments, for example, of a unique. That's what this is. Then of course you got char field, which is again varchar type, text type values. And then I'll specify the max lengths. date time field. Again, pretty straightforward when you look at it, right? We're creating these objects and we're specifying what they are, right? This is a char, date time, decimal. So everything the way we normally do in a database, we're doing it in the same manner. We're just doing it in Python now. Now when we need to interact with the database, instead of writing raw SQL, a select star or select a list of columns where x equals y or whatever, we don't need to do that anymore. Now we could just keep everything pure Python, which means we're going to interact with this table, stock EOD price table, end of day price table. I don't need to write raw SQL inside my Python code. I could call, again, this is part of the ORM, but I could call this object, this class, which is all Python, and then I could do inserts, I could do updates, queries, etc. And I'll kind of walk through that process with you. But for right now, we want to just establish the connection. So again, got my base model class, I'm inheriting that, and ultimately that I'm able to now use all these other classes related to that. And then of course we have a metadata in the bottom. Now this Postgres, I want to show you something right quick. So this class takes in a few variables, passing in the database. Then we have quarks, and that will be like host, username, password, all the information that we pretty much created in our config file. We're ultimately going to pass into this class, right? So let's go ahead and get that set up. Database equals, before I do that, what I'm going to have to do here is I'm going to have to, let's see, I'm going to have to import in my config file. And inside of my config file, I'm going to end up calling, what is it, my database. So be config.database, and then I'm going to end up specifying one of the variables that I configured in there, which is called name. Again, database name. So let me format this properly. Okay, so all right, so the next thing is going to be users.config databases.user. Again, it's all of these values that I have here, right? Name, user, etc. So the other one is going to be password config, database, and what did I call it? Password, yep. So just copy that right quick. And the other one is host. Yep. And the last one is going to be port. All right. So again, you could just manually put this in here, right? Just hard code it in. If you're just trying to learn, you could do that. I'm just trying to do it more in a manner where if you were to try to implement this somewhat, I don't want to call it production ready, but something at least towards that, then you wouldn't want to hard code it in. You want to create environment variables, and then you could pass it in directly here, pass it into a config file the way I did it. I mean, you could do whatever you want to do, but this is just the way I did it. So now we have our database connection establishing down here. So ultimately everything looks good, right? And again, everything that we did here was to connect using Peewee to our database, right? Which is the ORM, which is number one. Second, we created our table we pretty much took our database table and converted it to a manner now where it becomes a Python object. And because it's a Python object, we could interact with this object, again, to do inserts, updates, queries, and so on. So now we're able to do that. So this is, again, part of our models file. So now we got that in order. That's in place. So the next thing is, let's take a look. So we have our run.py file. So let's just take a look at what we have. We have our config. In this case, is literally configuring the database. There's a few things that I need to add to the config as well. So for example, kind of what we talked about earlier, we're going to be calling this market stack API. And we're going to be calling the end of day data API. All right, so what I need to do, I need to get my access token, because that's all I need to pass by. So let me get that configured as well. So what I'm going to end up doing over here is I'm going to just call it market stack ms underscore. It's going to be our access key. And this is going to equals os get environment variable and the name of the variable that I'm going to call it. Again, I'm going to save my key in this other file, this .env file, so I can just call my, get that value. So I don't want, so as I do this tutorial, I'm not sharing that sensitive data with you, right? But I do that. It has nothing to do with me sharing it with you. When you're doing something in production and more in that level, you don't want to hard code it in. You want to put it somewhere else. And again, like this environment variable file, this is going to be part of my get ignore file as well. Like this is not going to get uploaded to GitHub, because the way you would do it, right, more from a production standpoint, the server that you configured, you're going to configure these variables in that server as well, whether it be a .env file, whether it be a .env file, but located in some sort of other folder in your server that you could, again, that's a whole different video. I'm not trying to go into details, but that's you would do something similar to that. So this stays strictly on my folder. So when I promote this code to GitHub, you're not going to see this file in there. But earlier, again, I did show you an example on how it looks. It's key value pair. You got a key equals the value. So I'm going to have a key in my folder, and I'm just going to call it ms access key. That's going to be the name of my key. And actually, let me go ahead and get that. Let me open that up. And let me put my API key in there. So let's see. All right, so I'm going to do this, right? I'm going to reset it anyway, so that's why it's not a big deal. But those of y'all who are new, who are not familiar with it, just want to kind of show y'all, so just so you're aware. So this right here, where you see this key, this is the key equals the value. This is going to be in my .env file, all right? So that means if you promote this to production or somewhere, and you have your .env file somewhere in your production server, again, you would create these variables to this file on that specific server. Would it be part of your repository when your pull request? Just like when in my case, I'm not going to push this over to GitHub, because if I do that, then you'll see all of my passwords and my keys. So what you do is, again, you just, when you're going to implement in production, you create it. But I just wanted to show you on how it looks. So if you, when you're doing this testing, you could just put in the config file, you could just put kind of what I did, or if you create a .env file, this is how it's going to look in that file. And ultimately what I'm doing is I'm calling this key, and then of course it's going to get this value, and it's ultimately just going to replace this with this value, which is the same thing, right? Again, I could do it this way and it works, but it's just not ideal to do that, you know, do it in that way. It makes sense to do it for testing. Doesn't make sense when you're dealing with more like production type work. But again, just want to show y'all, and it's not a big deal because I'm going to reset the key anyways once I'm done with this video, so I'm not concerned about it. All right, so I got that in place. Let's go back to, what was I doing? Okay, so just kind of going back. So we have our models, we have our config. So this is our configuration for database. Then we have our access token, because that's what we're going to need. We're going to need our access token. The next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to create this is a small project, which is why this would work. So I'm going to create a file called dbpy. All right. Inside this file, I'm going to import in models. My bad. So I'm going to do from models import star. I mean, in reality, I guess this is the only one that I need, so I guess I could specify that. There we go, stock EFD price. All right, so I want to import this into the, so I'm going to explain to you what the dbpy file is. Pretty much a database. The database file, I'm going to have, and in a normal project, I will have 4 classes. I will have class create record, and then inside here I would have what I'm creating. So in this case, I'm creating a stock end of day price. And the way I normally like to build this out is the function is going to be the name of the table. The class represents what it is that I'm doing. In this case, I'm creating records. So I would have 4 classes. One would be called create record. The other one would be update record. Again, same thing for stock end of day price. The next one would be delete record, stock end of day price, and the fourth one would be read record, which is more just like a query, right? We're just querying data. So in this case, it would be stock end of day price. All right, so we have 4 classes: create, update, delete, and read. In this project that we're doing, we're gonna create for sure because we're taking data to load it. We're probably not going to do any deletes, or updates, or reads. I probably could do an example just to show you on how to do it, but I may do another video that's probably more related to ORM specific on how you do a read, you know, an update, a delete with an ORM. So again, I'll probably leave that for another project, but just want to kind of show you right quick. Normally, this is what I do when I'm done with a big project. What I actually do is I create a folder called database, and inside that folder I create 4 files: create, read, delete, update. And then inside those files I would have these classes. So like that, I'm able to separate all of my reads, my updates, deletes, and kind of put them all in the folder itself. That's the way I like to do it, and I find it to be very beneficial. But again, that's just me. For this project, we're not going to use none of these other ones. We're only going to do create, but I just wanted to show y'all, at least that's what I wanted to do here. Now, for my create, we're going to do a quarks. Right, so if you're not familiar with quarks, they're very beneficial. Like, I'm a big fan of it. It could be a little bit confusing when you're first learning how to use it or what it is, but man, it comes in very handy. I like to think of it as key value pairs. Ultimately, what it is, kind of like think of it like a dictionary object, I guess you could say. Something like you specify wherever I call this function, I'm gonna be specifying key value pairs in there dynamically, right? Just I could create as many as I want, and ultimately inside my function here, I could then start calling those keys like to parse out the values out. Then of course, in my case, we're going to insert data to a database. That's kind of what's happening here. So let's look at our database right quick. All right, so we know we're dealing with these 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's create that in here. So the way we would do that would be, we're gonna call our model. All right, keep that in mind. We're calling our object, which is a model. Again, same thing as the way it is in SQL. Just we made it into a Python friendly manner, right? We can interact with this using Python. So let's see. All right, let me take a look at something right quick. All right, so what we're gonna end up doing here would be, we're gonna call our model, and there is a create function. Again, this is all part of Pewee, right? So inside this function, this create function, this is where we're going to be specifying the name of each column. Again, let's take a quick look at it. Stock ticker, end of day, and so on. We created a model. Let me kind of add it over here. So these are all the names, right, that we have. So ultimately what's going to happen here, I'm going to start with stock ticker equals quarks, and then I'm going to call it stock ticker as well. All right. Again, I'll explain a little bit on what I'm doing here, but remember how we talked about quarks is pretty much, think of it like a dictionary object, that's being passed through the key value pair. So in order to start extracting the value out of it, I need to call the key that's part of this. This is the equivalent of, just kind of show you right quick. It's the equivalent of this, right? If I were to say stock ticker, and then I end up specifying, what is it? I think that's Apple, I believe, right? So then it'll be, the next one would be end of date, which is 2020. What's today? 12, 18. Right. So again, if you were to pass this object in here, in order to now start to extract the values of that object, right? Like each key, this is exactly what you would do, right? You would call that key to get to the value. That's ultimately what I'm doing, but we don't have to create this object in advance and pack it together. Quarks allow us to do that kind of on the fly when we use or call this this function, and I'll show you that in a minute. So again, we have stock ticker. What's the next one? End of day, date, quarks, end of day, date. Let's call it the same name. Open price. open price, end of day price, end of day. Damn it. I'm trying to pick up again. My camera actually turned off on me, froze on me better yet. It turned off on me. I have a Canon M50. Any of y'all who know about camera know that Canon M50 only lasts 30 minutes. So in my case, this video is lasting longer than that. So of course it shuts off. So I have to turn it off, turn it back on until the next 30 minutes hit. So yeah, it is what it is. I just have to deal with it for now. So let me try to pick up where I left off. So just kind of going back, here's our model. That model has a create method. So ultimately we're going to specify the name of each column, which again, if we come back to our model, this is the name of all the columns. And then we're going to pass in values into it. And again, I kind of explained a little bit about quarks when my camera froze. So I'll leave that in the video. You just may see me froze and not moving. But hopefully that makes sense. So we have end of day price. And so here's a create. I'm not going to add a create on here. And the reason why, because it's already default to be set to now. So because of that, there's no need for me to specify it. Now, if I did not default this to now, I can add it, right? In that case, I could go ahead and just add it. And what I could do is import in the date time method, and it'll be date time now, and that'll set it to whatever time it is right now. Right now, there's a big difference of these two. This database, for example, it is on AWS, and the time is UTC. So again, I'm Central Time, which means if I were to do it this way, it would actually log in the database at 12:32 a.m. in the morning. If I do it this way, because it's UTC, it would actually log in because we did an hour difference. It would be 6:33 a.m. So there's a big difference there from hours, but you just have to. Normally, I like to keep things UTC. Once you have it in UTC, you could always adjust it to any time zone you want. It's a lot challenging if you were to log in your time in, let's say, Eastern, Central, Pacific time, and then later on you have different people looking at the data, but they want to see it in a specific time zone. It makes it a lot messier, at least in my mind. So I like to just keep it in UTC when possible. Okay, so now that we have that in place, as you could tell, this is fairly simple. And what this is going to do is actually going to create a record for us. Again, when you look at this, there is no insert. We're not writing SQL script that says insert these columns and then provide the values to insert. There is no SQL in here. It's all Python, right? It's all Python objects. It's very programmatic. So that's one of the benefits of using an ORM. I strongly recommend it. It does provide you with a key and return. So anytime that you create a new record, it's going to return back the key, which again is going to be this ID number because it auto increments. So if you ever need that key for some reason, a good example would be if you're inserting, let's say you have, I'm trying to think of a good example. A good example is you have a client that's purchasing 5 items, and you have a model that says, not client, you have a client is purchasing an item. So let's say you have a sales table, right, for any sale that occurs per day. So you have one, sale, like kind of like one receipt, but in the same time you have that one receipt has 5 items in it. So you have a table that is for sale, Then you have another table that is for like cell details, for example. So as you make one cell, that one cell contains 5 items. So in this case, where you do have two tables, and you may want to insert data into the first table, get back your key, and then you go to insert data to the second table, but also insert that key with it. So you'll be able to now link the two together. Again, that will be uh, a foreign key relationship, right? Primary foreign key relationship, and so on. Again, that's more of FYI. I'm not think I'm going to need too much details, but that would be just an example on why you would want to return it back. In this case, we don't need to return it back, so it's fine. So at least we have our model to do that piece with now. Okay, so the next piece is going to be, let's see. It's going to be our API. So for that, I'm just going to put in my run file, right? It's not too much going on. So let's take a look at the documentation for the API that we're going to. So again, we're going to be calling the end of day data API. So let's take a look at it. This is just kind of telling you the format of it, where it's going to be the URL. Then of course you have end of day, which is a type, kind of just specifying which API to call. And then part of the URL is going to be the access key. And then of course the symbol, which in this case would be the stock ticker. So again, I hit the run API, and this is how the data is going to look. This is what we're going to get back in return. But one of the things, the way I like to test things out is, let's see. So what we're going to use is we're going to use Postman. I always like to use Postman first to kind of just see the data and make sure that everything's configured properly, and then I'll end up coding it. Okay, so now I'm going to bring up Postman. All right, so let me put this side by side. Sure why. There it goes. All right, so let's take a look at it. So in this case, this is going to be and it is a GET request. Let's see. So there's this other one, ticketer endpoint. Let's take a look at that. And ultimately, this is our URL right here. So let me replace this guy with ticketer, then symbol. So let's take a look at Apple. Then we have end of day, because we want it to be end of day. All right, so I need to provide my access token as well. So let's see. Yep, so it's doing a GET request. Access key is required. Specify your access key available in your account dashboard. All right, so I got that. So let's look at parameters. I'm going to call this access key. I'm going to put in my value. And that is it, man, as you could tell. Right, so we specified the URL that is needed. We have in here which stock symbol we want to look at, which is Apple, and then we specified our key, and then also end of day. So let's do send. You know what? I put 2 forward slashes. There it goes. Let's try it now. There we go. So now we got our data. Again, we should only have data for 1 day. So we take a look at it. You know, this kind of tells us all the details. It is Apple. There's the name of the company, the symbol. It just kind of gives the other details, right? Part of the NASDAQ, stock exchange. And this is the detail that we want right here. End of day. We're dealing with the open and the close, which is what we specified. And then here's our date. This is the date that we want to capture. Again, I'm running this at December 18th. But again, the market's closed right now. So this is giving me data for when the last time, for when it last ended, right? The end of day of the latest date. So in this case would be the 17th. Let's see what else. And then it's actually giving me data for the other dates, 16, 15, 14. But again, if I come back, yeah, it's actually giving us data end of day for many days. All right, so in our case, we don't want all the days. So look at the RPI. There's an option that says latest. So let's try that one out. So be end of day latest. So now we're talking. Now we're only getting that one data set only for that one specific date, which is the 12/17. This is exactly what I want. Now, as you saw, we got more days in here. So if we're trying to get more than 1 day, you know, it's there. You're able to also specify a date range or specify a specific date if you want to iterate, like, you know, giving back the last 30 days or whatever it may be. So there's different options, but in my case, I want the latest. That's what I'm going to be doing here. Because the goal is to, if I want to capture this every day, I could just run this job, let's say at midnight, and it'll give me the data from that previous day. And then I will just start accumulating this data over time if I want to do my own analysis. Now, a lot of the data is already provided for you, you know, of course, but depending on what kind of analysis you're trying to do, you know, this will be, you know, so either, okay, so now we know this is what we want. This is exactly what we want here. So I feel good with our API. It makes sense of what we're doing. I see what we're getting back is going to be very easy to extract. I don't see any issues with this at all. So now let's start coding this. Let's start putting this together. Okay, so I'm going to come to my run.py file. Let me import in my request package, and I am gonna let me also include my models, not my models, my database. Create, is that what I called it? Create records. Yep, create record, my bad. So bring that in. All right, so what we're gonna do here is we're ultimately gonna just have. Let me get a few things set up first, right? So you know what? Let me do this differently. So let me do this. I'm gonna create a new file, right? So we know we're trying to call the market stack API in this case. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna call this market stack py. Okay, so in this file, I'm gonna be making the request to the API. I'm not inserting no data to the database. That's not what I'm doing. I'm literally just executing, sending the request. I'm gonna create a class and I'm gonna call it market ms for market stack. What are we doing here? We're doing end of day. So you know what? I don't need to call it market stack. I'm gonna call this end of day API. That's what I'm gonna call it. All right, so this end of day API, we're going to end up, let's see. All right, so based on initiation, pretty much based on us calling this API, we're going to specify. I'm not going to do it in this example. I want to make it simple. Just again, the purpose of what we're trying to do here, not go too detailed. So ultimately, we have this API. So what I would do in this case, if I wanted to call some of the other ones, for example, what are the other ones? The real time. I will probably call this real time API. Let me just call it end of day API, real time API. Again, we're not going to do the real time as the other ones, but if we did, we could create different classes for each one. That's the point I'm trying to make here. In our case, though, we're just going to call end of day API. All right, so we're just calling that one. And inside this one, we're going to have a parameters dictionary, which is going to be access key. And again, this goes back to my I need to import in where is it? Is it config import ms access key, right? So this is where I want to end up specifying that key. Again, I shared with you already the key. You probably saw it already when we did the Postman. But again, this is where I'm going to end up because it's being stored in this file. I'm going to call it in here. If you don't want to store it, just again hard code it in here. That's fine for your own testing. The next thing is I'm going to create a results object, and this is going to end up doing a request get. In this case, I need to specify what I'm getting. So let's just specify. We know what the URL is, which is going to be this guy right here. And let me close out of this. I don't need this right now. All right, so we know what the URL is. That's our URL. And then we're going to specify our parameters. Oops, I spelled this wrong. PR, okay, there it goes. Got it right now. All right. Which by me doing it this way, because again, if we need to specify other parameters, we can. But that is the same thing of what I did here. Ultimately, it's going to end up building a URL that equates to this, which again has the access key equals the key. Same concept. All right. And next, I'm gonna end up returning this back. That's what I'm gonna do. So now I'm gonna have a results JSON, right? Because I want to return back to the results in a JSON format. It's what I'm doing here. So that is what this market stack py is doing. I'm gonna call this API. Now again, if I were to go more detail and I want to specify dates, actually, I do need a. I don't know why I did not include this. I do need to include this. I need to call stock ticker. This needs to be a variable that's being passed in, because it may not always be Apple. It may be other ones that I want to incorporate that I want to call. Right. So I need to make this a variable. So what I'm going to do here is call this URL. Let me move this over here. Let's see. Okay, so and then what I'm going to do here is going to be stock ticker, and we're going to replace this guy. Oops, 0. We're doing it by index. When you have 1, replace whatever value I populate in here. So whatever value I pass in is going to get it's going to replace the stock ticker, and then I am going to call this inside my get request, and then I'm going to return back the results in a JSON format. So that's all we're doing here. We're passing in our access key as a parameter, where the stock ticker is going to be a variable, right? So we got to pass that in. It could be different ones, and then ultimately we're going to get the results back, make it a JSON, and return it back. Okay, so now that we have this in place, again, if you're going to have many other ones, then you could add another one for real time. Like, again, I just kind of walk through the documentation right quick. If we take a look at it, again, we have end of day, intro day, real time, historical. Depending on what it is, these could all be, we could create classes for each one of these. And ultimately, when we call it, we could pass in different variables as well to get what we need, right? Like the one that had the date, the variable would be a date because we're going to specify the date. So it depends on what we're trying to do. All right, so now that we have that in place, now I'm going to go back to my read file. So I don't need none of this. Oh, I do need the database one, but I don't need the first one. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to, I need to import this as well. So it would be import market stack import, what do I call it? End of day API. All right. Ultimately, what I'm getting here is going to be my data. So let's see. Okay, so ultimately what we're gonna do here is first I'm gonna end up starting off by if name equals main. Ultimately what this does is when we end up running this run.py file, it's gonna execute anything that we have under here, right? So if we create any classes up above, we could call it down here. Any functions, we could call it and use it, so on and so on. For this example, it's gonna be a few lines of code, and I'm gonna have it under here. So the first one would be end of day data, and that's gonna be end up coming from the end of day API, right? So, and I'm gonna end up passing in, let's say Apple for now. We want to get data for Apple. So here's my data right here, right? We know how the data is going to look. So if I go back to my Postman, this is going to be the results that we're going to get back. And if I look at my database, ultimately what we want is we're going to want symbol. It's going to get mapped to stock ticker. Date is going to get mapped to end of date. Open price will be open, end of day price would be close, and that's it. What I'm going to do is something that will probably be more realistic. If you have something running, you may want to get data for multiple stocks, not just one. And which means you may have a database, and you may have data. You could have data in the database where you're going to pull that data. I'm not going to go into that detail, but what I am going to do is I'm going to create I'm going to call it ticker list, right? So in here, we're going to call it Apple city. Let's find a few other ones. You know what? Let me find some of the ones that I have, some of my stocks. So let's see. Okay, city, United Airlines, .3M, and that's fine. We'll stick to that for now. That's good enough. Okay, so now that we have a list of the stocks that we want to look into, let's do a for loop, right? So I'm going to say ticker in ticker list, because we're going to again iterate over that. We're going to pass that into the API, so we'll get the data back, which we are going to get data back. As we get data back, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to end up calling my create record, and it's going to be, what is it called? Stock end of day price. Okay, and ultimately I'm going to have to specify, let's see, let me split this up. I'm going to have to call, again, this is the quar. Again, remember we talked about quars a little bit, the key value pair. So this is the actual key. So this key I need to actually specify over here. And then of course I'm going to specify a value. So in this case the value would be end of day data. And again, I'm going to look at the Postman. In this case, it's going to be symbol. All right, so let me move that to the side. Now I don't have to do symbol because I know what ticketer I'm working on, right? So technically, I could just populate, yeah, this ticketer in here as well, and that should be fine. But again, either way, it doesn't matter. What's the other one? End of date. This is going to be it's called date. That's what it's called. Open price. Let's see, open price. What is it called? It's called open. What's the next one? End of day price. And this is called close. Again, so we're taking the data, extracting it, then we're gonna pass it to the class. Again, going back to our database file. This is the class, and this is the method. And ultimately, by us passing in these values, is going to call the model, which is going to create a record into our database. And that's ultimately, again, it's going to repeat itself. It's going to do this one by one, continue to create everything until it's done. And I'm just going to specify here, done. You know, and just to make sure that it got started, I'm going to specify start process. All right. So now, man, I think we got everything, man, to be honest with you, but let's test it out. So let me go to my terminal. Let's see. I'm going to run the Python run py. Fingers crossed. Let's see. So before I do that, let me go to my database, just so we could kind of take a look at it, right? So if I look at my data, hit refresh, no data, right? I don't have any data in there. Let me run this. Ooh. Oops, I typed it in wrong. Look at data based, which is not valid. All right, so let's take a look at our configs file. Okay, it wasn't the configs file, it was the models file. Yep, there it goes. Okay, so now let's try again. What happened here? Let's see. Line 10. Ooh, hold on. I think I know what it is. And this is my bad if it's what I think what it is. I should not, I don't know why I did it this way. This is my mistake. So initially you could initiate certain things. There's no need to initiate it in this case. There really isn't. So what I should have done is let me call this method end of day API, and I'm just gonna call it execute. Okay. Not execute. Let me call it get. That's what I'm doing. Running a get command. So now let me go back to my run. This is going to be .get. There you go. I don't know why I did it that way. Again, probably because it's 1 a.m. and you know, mine is not 100% there, but either way, we'll get through this. So starting process, which is good, then done. All right, so let's see what we have. Let's take a look at our database. Boom, we got exactly what we need. We have 4 stocks in here. Again, Apple, CD, United Airlines, 3M. We have the date. This is odd. I wonder why 3M has a 16th. Very odd. Then of course we have our open price, end of day price. Again, very little change. Very little change overall, but nevertheless, that pretty much gave us what we wanted, right? In this case, and let's just take a look at some of the data, right? So, end of day data. I want you to kind of see this data as well. So let me run this process. There you go. So again, this is our pretty much our JSON data, right? Which is again a dictionary, And then ultimately what we're doing here is we're calling these symbols, dates, open and close, which we can see in here, right? Open, close, where's symbol at? Symbol, then date at the very end. And we're just parsing that data out. The one thing that I need to do, which I have not done, and let me go ahead and do it right quick, is we need to create a requirements file. So I'm going to do Python freeze, oh my bad, pip freeze requirements.txt. Oops. I forgot the okay. So what this ultimately does is, you could tell it created this requirements file. So let's take a look at it. These are all the dependencies that are needed in this project. Now I am using Python 3.8. So just kind of FYI, but for the most half, this should work for anything Python 3.6 and above. You should be fine. So that would be part of this project. Again, my virtual environment is not going to get uploaded to GitHub, and my .env file is not going to get uploaded to GitHub either. So if you're working on this project and if you want to create, you go to the config, you have two options. Delete this and just hard code in your values in here. That's option number one. Option number two is go ahead and create the .env file and then provide it a key value, right? This is the key equals the value. Provide that inside this file, then ultimately this method will load those variables, and then you'll be able to now call it, and use it throughout your project. So, all right, guys. So, man, I really do hope that this helps y'all out. This brings some value to y'all, man. Give you some insight to connect, how to call an API, how to retrieve the data, how to parse the data, how to load data using an ORM. Again, it makes it a lot easier, in my opinion, instead of using the raw SQL. Again, I hope it brings value to y'all, man. Hit that thumbs up. Follow me. Let me know, man. I wanna know from y'all, like, y'all are the viewers. Is there any content, any area that you want me to maybe make a video over? Put in the comments. If you're having issues with one of your projects, maybe I can help you out. But if you have any ideas of certain topics, let me know. I'll try to make a video about it. But again, man, thanks for watching. Hit that thumbs up. Really appreciate it. Peace.